In the name of God, who is infinite compassion and eternal mercy. Amen.
Amen.
Happy Father's Day to those of you who have fathers, or who are fathers. We need you, fathers. We're grateful for you, and we value you. I trust that your day will be full of blessing and appreciation, and that you'll have a good meal. Today, we also observe Juneteenth. Both observances are on June 19th this year. Fathers, I encourage you to get ready because every year going forward, these two holidays are going to coincide. Juneteenth is a federal holiday which commemorates the emancipation of African Americans from slavery. African Americans have settled this holiday for many, many years now. It's a commemoration of the event 157 years ago on June 19, 1865, when Union General Gordon Granger proclaimed in Galveston, Texas, that the slaves were free. The word of the Emancipation Proclamation went with the Union troops. And as they moved forward, Texas was the last stronghold of the Confederacy, and they didn't get there until 2.5 years after the original proclamation. Texas has been celebrating Freedom Day ever since. And over the years, the date has been lifted up in Congress for federal recognition. But it took the death of George Floyd to raise our national consciousness about our legacy of history and racism. And Juneteenth was reintroduced into Congress and signed into law in 2021. It became a federal holiday. Jelani Cobb, who is a staff writer for the New Yorker, and also the incoming dean of the Columbia School of Journalism, sees Juneteenth as a marker of our maturing as a nation. Juneteenth is not just about the end of a brutal system, he says, but it is also a moral marker. To be celebrating a day important to African Americans is a first for us as a country. Martin Luther King was important to us as a nation, but Juneteenth is a uniquely African American celebration. To prepare for Juneteenth, I decided it was time to see a movie that has been around in Episcopal circles since 2008 when it was first produced. It's a story about an Episcopal family of businessmen, bankers, academics, and clergy who were prominent in Bristol, New Hampshire. In fact, they're the family of Bristol, New Hampshire. Traces of the Trade, a story from the deep north. Maybe you've seen it. I haven't. It concerns the DeWolf family of Rhode Island. One of the family descendants, who was an Episcopal seminarian, discovered to her horror, tucked away in a family history, written by her grandmother, that their family wealth had been based on the slave trade. It was one of their family rules never to talk about religion, politics, or the Negroes. Her family, the DeWolfs, was the largest slave trading family in the entire United States. She learns that New England in general and Bristol, Rhode Island, the seat of the DeWolf family, was the center of the US slave trade. Sugar from the Caribbean to Bristol, New Hampshire to make rum, rum to Africa to buy slaves, slaves to the South to make money, the slave triangle. We think of the South as the center of the slave trade, but they were a part, not the center. The South needed cheap, in this case, free labor for a most labor-intensive crop, cotton. They bought and sold slaves to be workers. Cotton was to the 19th century what oil was to the 20th century, among the world's most widely traded commodities. The South profited from slave labor, but the North made money from slave trading. The movie got me thinking about my own family. I am very proud to be the great-great-granddaughter of Brigham Young, leader of the Mormons in Utah. I do think the Mormon belief system is a little wacky, but I do claim Brigham as my forebear. He was brilliant as a leader and as an administrator, and I'll take that part. I asked Google, did the Mormons have slaves? Thinking, no, of course they didn't. Well, I was appalled to learn that they did. And that in fact, my great-great-grandfather was a supporter not only of African-American slavery, but that of Native Americans. Although he did not own slaves, it was a slave who drove the wagon in which Brigham first entered the Salt Lake Valley in 1847. He fully condoned the practice. Only 2 human lifetimes, about 160 years, have passed since the end of slavery, only 2. It's not surprising that we can still feel the looming presence of this institution, which turned a poor fledgling nation into a financial colossus. The surprising bit has to do with the many specific ways slavery can still be felt in our economic life. Quote, American slavery is necessarily imprinted on the DNA of American capitalism, write the historians who wrote Slavery's Capitalism. But that's a topic for another day. What are we to do? What is our response? Jelani Cobb, whom I previously referenced, suggests that Juneteenth be a day for learning. I suggest this as a place. Given my experience, you might bring new eyes to your family of origin to see if slavery is hidden. As we heard about the DeWolf family, remember that the North was just as complicit in slavery as was the South. Recognize here that in sunny California, a so-called free state, we have a history of slavery and subjugation. About 1,500 slaves were brought to California to do work during the gold rush. The Mormon community brought slaves when they set up a community in San Bernardino. California was a free state in name only. The oppression and enslavement of Native Americans was also a fact here in California, begun in the name of God when padres who accompanied the Spanish settlers and soldiers came here and used Native Americans for labor. The importation of Chinese workers to work on the railroad was certainly a form of slavery, and legislation excluded them from any sort of participation in life here as regular citizens. The arrest and internment of Japanese Americans 72 years ago during the Second World War is a part of our recent history. We are not personally complicit in any of this, but knowledge, having our eyes opened, is honest and clarifying. To know that we are woven into this history will hopefully open us, not to guilt, but to compassion and the desire for healing and restoration. to laws and actions which will help us and our country continue to move forward from the brutal nightmare and atrocity of slavery. As a church, in 2006, our General Convention passed a resolution affirming our commitment to anti-racism, to the study of slavery, and to making reparations to the descendants of slaves. This year, our church joined 365 other churches and organizations urgently asking Congress to bring House Resolution 40, the Commission to Study Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act, to a full vote on the House floor. It continues to languish in committee. One interesting suggestion I heard, actually in Traces of the Trade by a Black lawyer, was that reparations be used not necessarily as payments to individual families or individuals, but rather as a fund to be made available to those Blacks, those African Americans who remain at the bottom of our socioeconomic order. As citizens, we can act against the voter suppression of people of color by giving money or writing emails or letters. We are fortunate to live in California, which is free of this injustice. As citizens, we can give money and or time to organizations looking for justice, equity, and equal rights. As Christians, we can pray for our battered country. Juneteenth is a celebration of freedom. May the United States of America truly be the land of the free and the home of brave action towards freedom and justice for all. Amen.
Amen. Amen.